Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're diving into some listener-suggested material today. And wow, this topic really hit a nerve. I mean, we got a ton of requests to unpack this whole idea of discipline.
Yeah, it's clearly something a lot of us are grappling with, right? I mean, how to actually make those changes we know we need to make.
Totally. And it seems like the core of what everyone's sending in is that self-discipline, it's not about just like white-knuckling it, forcing yourself. It's more like the foundation for getting what you really want out of life.
It's funny, one of the main sources you all shared, the power of discipline, that's exactly what it argues. It actually makes the case that self-discipline, it might even be more important than just natural smarts or talent.
Really. More than just being naturally gifted.
That's what the book says. It uses this example. Think about those New Year's resolutions everyone makes.
Yeah, I'm already failing at half of mine.
Right. But the book, it cites a study saying less than 10% of people actually keep those resolutions. And the reason? Lack of self-discipline. So for this deep dive, let's figure out, what can we actually do about it?
Awesome. Not just like, oh, discipline is good, but here's how to make it work for you.
Exactly. We're talking building those habits that actually stick, understanding why it matters so much, and really getting that sense of control, taking charge of your day.
Love it. So chapter by chapter, the power of discipline. Where do we even start?
Well, chapter 1, it throws down a pretty interesting idea. It's called self-discipline, the biological argument. Basically, it says self-discipline. It's not just some mind over matter thing. There's a biological side to it too.
Oh, interesting. So it's kind of like how we're wired.
In a way, yeah. And the book uses this classic study as an example, the Stanford marshmallow experiment. You familiar with that one?
Vaguely. It rings a bell. Kids and marshmallows, right?
Right. They gave kids a choice. Eat one marshmallow now or wait and get two later. What blew researchers' minds was what happened later on. They did these follow-up studies years later, and one in 2011 especially, it showed a huge connection between the kids who could wait, delay that gratification, and how well they did in life.
Whoa, seriously? Like their success overall was connected to marshmallows as a kid.
It seems that way. It's like that early ability to say, nope, gotta wait for the bigger reward. It actually set them up for making better decisions all around later in life.
Wow, that's wild.
Right. And when they looked at the brains of these adults who'd been good at waiting as kids, they found they had more activity in the prefrontal cortex. Now, that's the part of your brain that's all about, planning, controlling impulses, making smart choices. And here's the other crazy thing. When they looked at what happened in the brain when these folks had to choose healthy versus unhealthy options, there were differences in the ventral striatum. That's the area linked to, cravings and addictive stuff.
So hang on, someone listening right now, they're struggling with, I don't know, resisting junk food, or they just keep checking their phone when they should be working. Is the idea here that it's not just like they're weak-willed, but maybe it's partly these brain areas, and those can be retrained?
I think that's a great point to consider. It suggests that, yes, some people might be wired towards more impulsiveness, but our brains can change. Just like hitting the gym builds muscle, you can build those neural pathways for self-control. It just takes practice.
Okay, that's kind of hopeful, right? Like it's not all set in stone from childhood.
Right. We have more power to change than we sometimes think. But speaking of brains and willpower, chapter 1 also gets into something a lot of us experience. Willpower fatigue. Ever have those days where you're just mentally drained, no self-control left?
Oh yeah, constantly. By 3 p.m., I'm reaching for the cookie jar and giving up on everything productive.
The book compares willpower to a muscle, which I think is a helpful way to look at it. Imagine working out your arms super hard. You wouldn't expect them to be strong for another workout right away, right?
No way. You need rest.
Exactly. Willpower is the same. You can't just resist every temptation all day long. You gotta be strategic.
So it's okay to not be perfect, to give in sometimes.
The book emphasizes that it's not about being superhuman. There's actually a study they mentioned from way back in 1996 by Will Baumeister. It really drives this point home.
What do they do?
They put people in a room with the most delicious looking cookies and cakes you can imagine, and also a bowl of plain radishes.
Sounds cruel already.
One group got to eat the treats, the other had to eat radishes. Then they gave everyone a super tough puzzle to solve.
Let me guess, the radish eaters gave up faster.
Spot on. Their willpower was already drained from resisting the sweets, so they had less mental energy to stick with that puzzle. They just gave up easier. The study shows willpower is not endless. It's a resource that can get depleted.
So practical tip, don't try to be on high alert. resisting everything all day. Pick your battles, right?
Exactly. Focus your willpower where it matters most for your goals. And there's another thing that can totally mess with our self-control. Stress.
Oh, tell me about it. When I'm stressed, all my good habits fly out the window.
It's biology, unfortunately. When we're stressed, our bodies go into that fight or flight mode. It's meant to help us survive danger, but it messes with the prefrontal cortex, the part we need for good decisions.
Wait, so when I'm stressed, I'm literally less able to think clearly.
Basically, yeah. Your brain's prioritizing immediate survival over long-term planning. That's why when you're super stressed, you might reach for comfort food or do things you know aren't good for you in the long run.
That explains so much. It's like my brain's hijacked by stress hormones.
Makes sense, right? But even with all this complexity, the book boils discipline down to something pretty simple. It says, look, as adults, we mostly know right from wrong, especially when it comes to our goals.
Like, we know we should be hitting the gym, not the drive-through.
Exactly. So discipline is really just consistently doing what needs to be done, even when, and this is key, you don't feel like it.
That's the hardest part, right? If I only did what I felt like, I'd never leave my couch.
But the book emphasizes consistency is everything. Doing it even when you don't wanna, that's what builds momentum, gets you to your goals, and the more you do it, the easier it gets.
So it's like training your brain.
Totally. You're actually rewiring yourself. The more you choose discipline, even when it's tough, your brain starts to accept it as normal. Then it becomes less of a battle each time. Which actually brings us to chapter 2, the benefits of self-discipline.
Okay, so we know it's good for us, but what are we talking about specifically?
This chapter breaks down just how powerful self-discipline is, how it affects, like, every part of your life, your work, your relationships, your finances, everything. The book says a lot of us, we're kind of on autopilot, not realizing how much more control we could have.
You mean like just going through the motions?
Right, but when you cultivate self-discipline, wow, the benefits are huge. One that really resonated with me was the self-esteem boost.
Really? How does that work?
Think about it. When you constantly set goals but don't take action, there's that gap, right? And that can make you feel kind of worthless over time. The book gives this example. You want to lose weight, but you keep making unhealthy choices. That gap between wanting and doing, it chips away at your confidence.
It's like you're letting yourself down over and over.
Exactly. But when you're disciplined, you take action, you see progress, and that builds serious self-confidence. You start to believe in yourself like, hey, I can do this.
I can see that. Achieving things, even small things, it definitely gives you a boost.
Totally. And this confidence, it spills over into how you handle feedback, even criticism. The book says disciplined people, they don't get offended as easily. They see criticism as a way to improve, not a personal attack.
Because they have that inner strength, that belief in themselves.
Precisely. They're not as reliant on what others think. Their focus is on growth, not protecting a fragile ego.
That's powerful. And it's not just personal stuff, right? The book also talks about how self-discipline can help you avoid, like, risky behaviors.
Yes. This is huge. The book brings up this theory called self-control theory, which suggests that people who lack self-control, they're more likely to engage in criminal activity. It's like that impulse control, that ability to pause and think before you act, that can keep you out of trouble.
Makes sense. If you can't control those urges, you're more likely to make bad choices.
Right. And there's a study from 2012 that looked at college students, and they found that those with more self-control were way less likely to abuse prescription drugs, binge drink, or even use cannabis.
Wow. And it wasn't just drugs and alcohol, right?
No. The study also found a link between low self-control and impulsive sexual behavior, which obviously has its own set of risks. So it's pretty clear self-discipline has benefits way beyond just achieving goals. It helps you make healthier choices overall.
That's a pretty compelling case for working on our self-discipline. But if it's so great, why is it so hard? The book tackles this in chapter 3, the status quo bias, why we resist change. I feel seen already.
This chapter dives into a fundamental human quirk. We resist change, even when we know it's good for us. It acknowledges anyone trying to improve their discipline, kudos to you, but it's rarely easy.
You mean like intellectually I get it, but emotionally I'm stuck.
It's like there's these invisible mental roadblocks keeping us in our old ways.
Uh-huh.
And the book calls this the status quo bias. It's that human tendency to stick with what's familiar, even if it's not the best.
Ah, the comfort zone. Even when it's not that comfortable.
Exactly. It feels safer than the unknown. And there are a bunch of reasons for this bias, starting with the sunk cost fallacy. Ever stay in a bad situation just because you've already invested so much?
Oh, constantly. Relationships, jobs. I'm like, well, I already put in so much time. Might as well stick it out.
That's the fallacy in action. You think, I can't walk away now, I've already invested too much. But sometimes walking away is the best thing, even if it feels like a loss.
It's tough to admit you made a mistake and move on, right?
Totally. And then there's loss aversion theory. This is the idea that losing something hurts way more than gaining something of equal value feels good.
So even if change brings something better, we focus on what we might lose.
Yep, that fear of loss looms larger than the potential gains. So we need tons of convincing before we're willing to let go of the familiar, even if it's not great.
We underestimate the good and overestimate the bad when it comes to change.
Exactly. And then there's the fear of regret. Nobody wants to make a change, then look back and think, ugh, I wish I hadn't done that.
So we play it safe to avoid that feeling of what if I made the wrong choice?
Right. And that can keep us stuck in situations that aren't good for us. And then there's this sneaky thing called the mere exposure effect.
This one sounds interesting. What's that about?
Basically, the more we're exposed to something, the more we tend to like it, even if it's not good for us.
So like a bad habit, the more you do it, the more normal it feels.
Exactly. It becomes comfortable just because it's familiar, which makes it so hard to break bad habits. And it also works in reverse, making good habits easier to keep up.
That makes sense. Like waking up early. If you've always slept in, it's tough to change.
Exactly. You're fighting against years of that mere exposure. And the book warns the status quo bias, it might feel safe in the short term, but it can keep you from your dreams, from reaching your full potential.
And then you might end up with those big regrets, right? Like,
Wow.
I wish I'd taken that chance.
Absolutely. And to fight this bias, the book gives this cool tool, a thought evaluation exercise. You basically take a paper, divide it into 4 sections.
Okay, I'm picturing this. 4 sections.
And you list the advantages and disadvantages of sticking with the status quo, and then the advantages and disadvantages of making the change.
So you're forcing yourself to really consider both sides.
Yep. The book says, spend at least 10 minutes on this, write down everything you can think of, then sleep on it, come back with fresh eyes, maybe even talk it over with someone you trust, get a second opinion.
So you're not just relying on your gut feeling, which might be biased.
Exactly. You're bringing in logic and objectivity. It helps you make a smarter choice, not just a comfortable one. Now, speaking of making good choices, Chapter 4 is all about self-awareness, and it talks about this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
I've heard of this. It's where incompetent people think they're actually good at things, right?
This is the one.
Yeah.
And the book explains it's not just about being bad at something, it's about lacking the self-awareness to even realize you're bad. They called it a double burden. You mess up, and you don't even know you're messing up.
Ouch, that's got to be rough.
The book mentions studies where people scored super low on tests like humor, logic, grammar, and they were the most confident about their wrong answers. They blamed bad luck, anything but their own lack of skill.
It's like that saying, they're too stupid to know they're stupid.
Sadly, yeah. And the book contrasts this with people who are actually skilled. They tend to be more humble. They underestimate their abilities.
Because the more they know, the more they realize they don't know.
Exactly. So the key takeaway here is you need both self-confidence and a willingness to be wrong to learn and grow. The book uses this example of a good driver taking an advanced course. They got to be open to the feedback, even if it stings.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap of overestimating ourselves?
The book gives some great advice. First, never stop learning. Always seek out new knowledge and skills. Second, get feedback from people you trust. Maybe take courses, use apps that track your progress. Third, spend time with people who are better than you in areas you want to improve. Not to compare yourself negatively, but to learn from them.
Surround yourself with people who challenge you to be better.
Exactly. And keep track of your progress. It keeps you grounded and helps you see where you actually are versus where you want to be. Oh, and one important caveat about the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Don't go around diagnosing everyone you disagree with.
Exactly. It's tempting to use it as a weapon, but the real point is self-improvement, not judging others.
So be humble, be willing to learn, and don't be a jerk about it.
Perfectly summarized. And the chapter ends on a positive note, reminding us that nobody's perfect, and our flaws, they're just opportunities to grow. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of building better habits in Chapter 5. Daily habits to improve self-discipline.
Okay, so this is where the rubber meets the road, the practical stuff.
Totally. This chapter shifts from why to how. It says those small, consistent actions, those daily habits, those are the building blocks of self-discipline. The book starts by defining habits as those things we do automatically, without thinking. like brushing your teeth.
I never skip brushing my teeth, no matter how tired I am.
Right, and that's the goal, to make those actions that lead to your goals feel as natural and automatic as brushing your teeth.
So I don't have to fight myself to do them.
Exactly. The book says the main difference between successful people and those who struggle is often their daily habits. Successful people, they have routines that build them up mentally, physically, even spiritually.
And the book talks a lot about the morning routine, right? Like how you start your day matters.
Big time. The book contrasts starting your day by hitting snooze, feeling rushed, grabbing junk food, versus waking up on time, maybe exercising, eating a healthy breakfast. That sets you up for success all day.
It's like setting the tone, right? Like if I start off disciplined, it's easier to stay that way.
Exactly. And the book gives examples of successful people's routines, like Barack Obama making time for exercise, Bill Gates supposedly watching educational DVDs while on the treadmill, Oprah Winfrey meditating.
So different routines, but that common thread of starting a day intentionally with good habits.
Exactly. It's not just about what they do, it's about having a deliberate routine. And the book also stresses the importance of the end of your day.
You mean winding down?
Totally. Your bedtime routine is crucial for good sleep, and sleep is essential for physical and mental energy. The book suggests things like ditching your phone an hour before bed, maybe reading a physical book to relax.
I'm guilty of scrolling on my phone in bed. Got to work on that.
And they emphasize getting at least 7 hours of sleep. It's huge for productivity and health. Oh, and here's a great tip for those who feel overwhelmed by making changes.
Don't try to do it all at once.
Exactly. Pick one small habit, something manageable, and focus on that. Like eating more veggies, doing a little cardio, drinking more water. It's about consistency with one thing that builds the discipline.
Small steps, but done consistently, lead to bigger change. I like that.
It's less overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
And the book gives tons of tips for good sleep. Limit naps, avoid caffeine at night, watch what you eat before bed, create a relaxing bedtime routine, make sure your bedroom's dark and comfy.
All that stuff makes a difference.
It can, for sure. And one more thing, the book talks about having a clean and organized environment.
I definitely feel more stressed when my space is messy.
The book says a messy environment can actually contribute to feeling overwhelmed, which makes it harder to be disciplined. So tidy up your space, tidy up your mind.
I can get behind that. And the book mentioned 2 specific habits successful people often do before 8 a.m. Some form of prayer or meditation and exercise.
The meditation part, I think that's interesting for people of all backgrounds, not just religious folks.
It's becoming more mainstream, right?
The book cites all this research about meditation's benefits. Managing pain, reducing stress, improving memory, boosting focus, and creativity.
I've heard Oprah Winfrey swears by her daily meditation practice.
It can make a big difference. So those morning and evening routines, they're like the foundation for building self-discipline. But then how do we actually break bad habits and build new ones? That's Chapter 6, Practical Tips for Building Better Habits.
Bring on the practical tips.
This chapter gets into some really interesting mind tricks, drawing inspiration from folks like Navy SEALs who have that extreme discipline.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
They talk about the 40% rule. It's this idea that when you feel mentally or physically exhausted, like you want to quit, you've actually only reached about 40% of your potential.
You mean we have way more in the tank than we think?
Exactly. The key is to push past that initial feeling of fatigue to believe you have another 60% to give.
So it's about ignoring that voice in your head that says, I can't do anymore.
Right. And the book gives the example of doing pull-ups. You might think you can only do 10, but if you push through that mental barrier, you might surprise yourself and do 15, 20, who knows?
So you're proving that limiting voice wrong and expanding your own limits.
Totally. And not only do you achieve more in that moment, but you also build confidence and mental toughness, which are crucial for self-discipline.
It's like a positive feedback loop, right?
Yeah.
The more you push yourself, the more you believe you can.
Exactly. The book compares it to running a marathon unprepared versus running for your life in a dangerous situation. In that life or death scenario, you'd push yourself way beyond your normal limits, right?
Adrenaline kicks in. You find strength you didn't know you had.
It shows we often have no idea what we're truly capable of until we're really pushed. People with strong discipline, they choose to be extraordinary, even when it's hard.
And then the book talks about the placebo effect, which is fascinating.
Right. It shows how powerful our minds are. In one study, people who thought they'd taken caffeine actually lifted more weight, even if they'd just gotten a placebo. It's like our beliefs actually affect our physical performance.
So if you believe you can, you're more likely to.
It seems that way. The book uses this term arousal control. Navy SEALs, they train to control their stress response, even in crazy situations.
How did you do that?
They use techniques like Bach breathing, which is a specific way of breathing that helps calm you down. It's about regaining mental control when things are
So you're
intense.
not just reacting emotionally, you're staying calm and thinking clearly.
Exactly. And then there's the 10x rule, which is about setting your goals way higher than you normally would.
Like aiming for the stars, even if you think you might miss.
The book says that by believing you can achieve more, you'll actually take the actions needed to get there. It forces you to step up your game. And lastly, there's the 10-minute rule, which is about resisting those urges.
So when you get that urge to procrastinate or eat junk food or whatever, you wait 10 minutes before giving in.
That's it. It gives your rational mind time to catch up with your impulsive feelings. And it builds discipline by showing you that you don't have to act on every urge.
Like you're putting a pause between the urge and the action.
Exactly. The chapter ends by reminding us that discipline is a skill, not a talent. Anyone can develop it with practice, but there are some things that can hinder us, which is what Chapter 7, What is Hindering Your Discipline, is all about.
Okay, so what are these discipline killers we need to watch out for?
The book calls them energy vampires, and they're not always external things. It's often internal stuff like bad habits, negative thoughts, wrong beliefs, even the wrong motivation.
So things we might not even be aware of.
Right. And it starts with Parkinson's law, which says that work expands to fill the time available. Ever notice how you can take all day to do something that should only take an hour?
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's Parkinson's law in action. The book's advice is to set tight deadlines, create a sense of urgency. That helps you stay focused and avoid wasting time.
So it's about being intentional with your time, not just letting it slip away.
Exactly. And then the chapter goes after procrastination. It basically calls it a fancy word for inaction and making excuses. And both of those lead to failure.
I'm a master procrastinator. I'm always waiting for the perfect time to start things.
But the book says there's no such thing as the perfect time. You just got to start, even if you don't feel ready.
Easier said than done.
I know, but the book warns that making excuses just creates a pattern. It reinforces the belief that you can't do it. And then it talks about the 70% rule, which is this idea that you should start working towards a goal when you feel about 70% certain of your ability to succeed.
So not waiting for 100% certainty, because that might never come.
Exactly. It's about taking action, even if you're not fully confident, like training for a marathon. You don't wait until you can run 26 miles to start training, right?
You start where you are and build up gradually.
Exactly. It's about consistency and building momentum. Then the book talks about this thing called false hope syndrome. It's basically the belief that change is going to be easy and fast, which leads to unrealistic expectations and disappointment.
It's like that new year, new me mentality where people try to change everything at once and then burn out.
Exactly. Real change takes time and effort. And the book reminds us that most people give up when they realize how much work it actually takes.
It's like they want the results without the journey.
So be honest with yourself about the effort required and don't get discouraged if it takes time. The chapter ends by encouraging us to look at our own actions and see if we're self-sabotaging.
So it's about taking responsibility, not just blaming external factors.
Absolutely. And once you've identified those internal roadblocks, the next step is learning to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, which is chapter 8.
This one sounds tough.
It's about facing a fundamental truth. Self-discipline often means doing things that are uncomfortable.
Like going to the gym when you'd rather stay in bed.
Exactly. We don't need discipline for things that are easy and fun. But for those things that are important, that push us towards our goals, there's usually some level of discomfort involved.
So how do we get over that aversion to discomfort?
The book suggests actively practicing being uncomfortable. It mentions this TED Talk by Jia Jiang, who intentionally sought out rejection for 100 days to overcome his fear.
Wow, that takes guts.
But the book says it's about building resilience. By pushing yourself into those uncomfortable situations, you actually build your willpower.
Like a muscle that gets stronger with use.
Exactly. And it helps you change those bad habits and overcome addictions. The book emphasizes that discomfort is part of the process. It's not a sign of failure.
So embrace Seska, basically.
In a way, yeah. And the book offers a really helpful technique for managing discomfort called urge surfing.
That sounds interesting. How does it work?
The book compares urges to ocean waves. They rise, they peak, and then they crash. Urge surfing is about riding that wave without getting wiped out.
So you're not fighting the urge, you're observing it.
Exactly. Notice the sensations, the thoughts, the feelings that come with the urge, but don't identify with them, don't get caught up in them, just observe them as they rise and fall.
So it's about creating a sense of detachment, like you're watching a movie instead of being in it.
The book says that most urges, if you don't engage with them, will peak in about 20-30 minutes and then start to fade. But if you fight them or give in to them, you actually give them more power.
So ignoring is better than fighting.
In this case, yes. The book compares fighting an urge to trying to block a waterfall. Eventually, it'll just burst through with more force. Better to step aside and let it flow past.
That's a great analogy. And the book also suggests viewing urges with curiosity, not fear.
Right. It's about studying your habits and those triggers that set off the urges. Once you understand them, you can start to manage them better.
So urge surfing is like a mindfulness practice for dealing with those tempting moments.
Exactly. Notice, observe, and let it pass. The book cautions against trying to rationalize or distract yourself from urges, as that can actually make them stronger. It's about accepting them without judgment and letting them run their course.
So don't feed the monster, basically.
Precisely. It's about starving it of attention. The book offers specific steps. Identify where you feel the urge in your body. Focus on those sensations. Spend a couple of minutes on your breath. Imagine the sensations as waves rising and falling.
And it emphasizes that successfully surfing an urge builds confidence for next time.
It's like you've proven to yourself you can handle it. And the book reminds us that even the most intense urges are temporary. They'll pass eventually. It compares it to hunger pangs. Sometimes we feel hungry even when our bodies don't need food, and that feeling often fades if we just acknowledge it and wait it out.
It's about riding the wave, not getting swept away.
Exactly. Master urge surfing. And you can master those tempting moments, but to achieve your big goals, you need more than just managing urges. You need a solid plan. That's chapter 9. Focus on the system.
Okay, this sounds crucial. What's the system all about?
The book starts by saying, yeah, successful people have goals, but research shows that many people fail to reach their goals, not because of the goals themselves, but because of the system, or lack thereof.
So it's not enough to just have a destination, you need a roadmap to get there.
Right. A goal is what you want to achieve. The system is the process, the daily habits and actions you take to get there. The book gives this example of a football coach, one who just focuses on winning versus one who focuses on the team's daily practice and strategies.
The coach who focuses on the process is more likely to win in the long run.
Exactly. It's about consistent improvement day after day that leads to those big wins. And the book asks this question. In situations where everyone has the same goal, like athletes competing for a medal, what separates the winners from the losers?
The winners are more talented.
That's part of it, but the book argues that it's often the system, the strategy they use that gives them the edge. And it stresses that goals without a system are usually unsustainable.
So it's like you could tidy up a messy room, but if you don't change your messy habits, it'll just get messy again.
Right. Or losing weight with a crash diet. If you don't change your eating habits, the weight comes back. It's about addressing the root cause, not just the symptom.
Makes sense. So what's the key to lasting change?
The book talks about 3 levels of change: outcomes, processes, and identity. Outcomes are the results, processes are the habits and systems, and identity is how you see yourself. The book says, true, lasting change comes from shifting your identity.
So it's not just about getting a result, it's about becoming the kind of person who achieves those results.
Exactly. The book uses this example of 2 people trying to quit smoking. One says, I'm trying to give it up. The other says, I don't smoke. It's a subtle but powerful difference.
One still identifies as a smoker, the other has changed their identity.
Right. And it tells the story about Brian Clark, who finally stopped biting his nails. He didn't just stop the habit, he started taking pride in his manicured nails. His identity shifted.